My name is Claire Bennett, and for most of my life, I believed being needed was the same thing as being loved. It took me 32 years to learn the difference. 3 weeks ago, my parents stood in front of 30 guests at their 40th wedding anniversary celebration and publicly reminded me exactly where I ranked in this family. By the end of that night, I had made a decision that would change everything. But to understand why I left, you need to understand how I became invisible in the first place. The Bennett family lived in one of those picture-perfect neighborhoods outside Boston where every lawn looked identical and every mailbox matched. My father, Richard Bennett, had retired from a successful career in finance. My mother, Margaret Bennett, dedicated her life to maintaining what she proudly called the Bennett family image. Appearances mattered to my mother more than almost anything else. The right clothes. The right church. The right friends. The right conversations. And most importantly, the right child. That child was never me. My younger sister Olivia was only 3 years younger, but she may as well have lived in a different universe. Olivia was beautiful, outgoing, and effortlessly charming. She married Ryan Mitchell, a successful corporate lawyer, and together they had 2 adorable children, Emma and Lucas. My parents adored them all. Every family gathering revolved around Olivia. Every conversation eventually returned to Olivia. Every achievement she made became family history. Meanwhile, I occupied a different role. I was the reliable one. The helper. The person everyone called when something needed to be done. Need someone to organize Thanksgiving dinner? Call Claire. Need someone to pick up groceries before a family barbecue? Call Claire. Need emergency childcare because Olivia and Ryan wanted a weekend getaway? Call Claire. At first, I thought helping made me valuable. Then I realized helping was simply expected. Nobody thanked the refrigerator for keeping food cold. Nobody thanked the lamp for providing light. And nobody thanked Claire Bennett for making everyone's life easier. It was simply my function. Every Thanksgiving followed the same pattern. I arrived before sunrise while everyone else slept. I prepared ingredients, organized decorations, coordinated timing, and managed the kitchen. Around noon, Olivia would arrive looking flawless, carrying a store-bought pie she purchased 20 minutes earlier. My mother would immediately begin praising her. Olivia always has such wonderful taste. Olivia works so hard. Olivia deserves a relaxing holiday. Meanwhile, I stood over a stove for 10 hours and somehow became invisible. Christmas wasn't much different. Birthday parties were worse. I planned games, wrapped presents, entertained children, cleaned afterward, and drove home exhausted while everyone else enjoyed themselves. Looking back, the warning signs were obvious. But when a pattern begins in childhood, it feels normal. You don't question the rules of a game you've played your entire life. The truth is, I stopped expecting recognition years ago. What nobody knew was that I had a secret. 3 years earlier, after a painful breakup left me questioning everything about my life, I wandered into a small camera shop downtown. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just needed somewhere to go besides my empty apartment. That's where I found a used camera. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't professional. But the moment I held it, something clicked. Literally and emotionally. I bought it that afternoon. Then I started taking photographs. Not landscapes. Not tourist attractions. People. Ordinary people. The kinds of people most others ignored. Elderly men sitting alone on park benches. Waitresses finishing late shifts. Street vendors. Custodians. The overlooked. The forgotten. The invisible. Maybe I was photographing myself without realizing it. Over time, photography became more than a hobby. It became an escape. Then a passion. Then something even bigger. I created an anonymous online account where I shared my work. I never told my family. I never told anyone except one person. My Aunt Evelyn. Aunt Evelyn was my mother's younger sister and the unofficial black sheep of the family. Years ago, she left Massachusetts and moved to Carmel, California, where she opened a small cafe and pottery studio. My mother considered that decision a personal betrayal. Aunt Evelyn considered it freedom. We spoke every Sunday night. Those conversations became the highlight of my week. She was the only person who ever asked about my life instead of asking what I could do for theirs. 6 months ago, I nervously sent her a few photographs. Her response changed me. "Claire," she said, "these are extraordinary." Nobody had ever used that word to describe anything I created. Extraordinary. The word stayed with me. Then, 3 weeks before my parents' anniversary party, Aunt Evelyn called with news. News so unexpected that I nearly dropped the phone. A respected gallery owner in California had seen my work. He wanted to talk. He believed I might be ready for something much bigger. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a future that belonged entirely to me. I didn't know it then, but that future was already waiting. All it needed was one final push. And that push would arrive at my parents' anniversary celebration, disguised as humiliation. The anniversary celebration took place on a Saturday evening at a country club my mother had spent nearly 8 months planning. If there was one thing Margaret Bennett loved more than appearances, it was attention. And a 40th wedding anniversary offered plenty of opportunities for both. The ballroom looked beautiful. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm light across white tablecloths. Fresh flowers filled every corner. A live pianist played near the entrance while guests arrived dressed in expensive suits and elegant gowns. From the outside, it looked like a perfect family celebration. From the inside, I was already exhausted. I had arrived 6 hours before the event started. Not because I wanted to. Because my mother called 3 separate times that week reminding me how much she needed my help. By noon, I was arranging centerpieces. By 3 o'clock, I was coordinating catering details. By 5, I was solving seating chart problems after 2 guests canceled unexpectedly. Meanwhile, Olivia arrived 30 minutes before dinner wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The moment she walked through the doors, my mother's face lit up. "Olivia looks absolutely stunning." My father immediately stood to hug her. Guests surrounded her. Compliments flowed effortlessly. Nobody asked who spent the entire day making sure the event actually worked. I wasn't surprised. I hadn't been surprised in years. Around 7 o'clock, everyone gathered near the stage. My father tapped a spoon against his champagne glass. The room slowly quieted. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began. Applause followed. My mother smiled proudly beside him. They shared stories about their marriage. Old photographs appeared on a projector screen. Guests laughed. Some cried. The atmosphere felt warm and sentimental. Then my father announced there was one final surprise. "Margaret and I have decided to celebrate this milestone with a special family vacation." The room immediately erupted with excitement. My mother beamed. 3 weeks in Europe. More applause. Paris. Rome. Florence. Barcelona. Guests congratulated them enthusiastically. I smiled too. Honestly, I was happy for them. They had worked hard. They deserved a memorable trip. Then my mother added something that made my stomach tighten. "The entire family is coming." For a brief moment, I actually felt excited. The entire family. Maybe for once I was included. Maybe things were changing. Maybe I had misjudged everything. Then Olivia laughed. "Well, almost the entire family." Several guests chuckled politely. I frowned slightly. My father smiled toward me. "Claire has generously volunteered to stay behind." The room went silent for half a second. Just long enough for confusion to spread. "Someone needs to watch Emma and Lucas after they get home from school," my mother explained casually. "And Claire is wonderful with children." Laughter. Smiles. Nods of approval. My heart dropped. I looked around the room waiting for someone to realize how strange this sounded. Nobody did. She's always been the dependable one, Olivia added. More laughter. My father's voice carried across the room. Honestly, we couldn't make this trip happen without Claire's help. The words sounded like praise. They weren't. They were an announcement. A public declaration that while the family traveled across Europe creating memories together, I would remain home functioning as unpaid childcare. In front of 30 guests, I had been officially assigned my role. Again. I forced a smile because I didn't know what else to do. The applause eventually faded. Conversations resumed. Music returned. Yet something inside me felt different. Not hurt. Not exactly. Clear. Very clear. For years, I told myself the favoritism wasn't intentional. That my parents simply didn't notice. That Olivia didn't realize. Standing in that ballroom, I finally understood. They noticed. They knew. They simply didn't care. Around 10 o'clock, I slipped outside for air. The cool night breeze felt wonderful after hours inside the crowded ballroom. My phone vibrated. A group email notification. Family travel planning. I almost ignored it. Then curiosity won. I opened the message. At first, everything looked normal. Flight schedules. Hotel information. Activity planning. Then I noticed another thread attached below. A longer conversation. One I clearly wasn't supposed to see. Apparently someone accidentally included me while forwarding messages. My pulse accelerated as I began reading. Olivia, do we really need to explain this to Claire? My mother, not really. She'll do it. My father, she always does. Then came the sentence that changed everything. Olivia wrote, honestly, Claire is basically free help at this point. Free help. I stared at the screen. My mother responded with a laughing emoji. My father wrote, that's one way to put it. There it was. No misunderstanding. No interpretation required. In a few careless words, they had revealed exactly how they saw me. Not a daughter. Not family. Not someone they loved. A resource. A convenience. Free help. Standing alone outside my parents' anniversary celebration, I read those words 3 more times. Then I called the only person who had ever truly seen me. Aunt Evelyn answered on the second ring. The moment she heard my voice, she asked a question that changed my life. Claire, what happened? When Aunt Evelyn answered the phone that night, I didn't know what I was going to say. I only knew that if I stayed at the anniversary party 1 minute longer, I might finally break down in front of people who didn't deserve to see it. Claire, what happened? She asked. Her voice immediately softened. I walked farther into the darkness beyond the parking lot, away from the music and laughter drifting from the ballroom windows. They did it again. There was a brief pause. What did they do? I looked down at my phone screen where the email still glowed. Free help. 3 simple words. 3 decades summarized perfectly. They announced a family trip to Europe. That sounds nice. I laughed bitterly. Everyone's going except me. Silence. Why? Because I'm staying home to watch Olivia's kids. Another silence. Longer this time. Then I heard Aunt Evelyn exhale slowly. Claire. It gets better. I forwarded her the email thread. Less than 30 seconds later, she read it. Oh, sweetheart. The pity in her voice almost hurt more than the email itself. We talked for nearly an hour while the anniversary celebration continued without me. For the first time, I said things out loud that I normally kept buried. How exhausted I felt. How invisible I felt. How every family gathering left me feeling smaller than when I arrived. Aunt Evelyn listened without interrupting. Then she asked a question nobody had ever asked me before. Why are you still there? I frowned. What do you mean? Why are you still giving them access to you? The question stunned me because I genuinely didn't know the answer. Habit, maybe. Hope. Loyalty. Fear. Some combination of all three. Eventually, I returned inside. Nobody noticed I had been gone. Olivia was laughing with friends. My parents were dancing. Guests were enjoying dessert. Life continued exactly as before. Which somehow made everything worse. Around midnight, I quietly left. No dramatic goodbye. No confrontation. No scene. Just a drive home through empty streets while replaying the evening in my mind. The next morning, my apartment felt unusually quiet. I made coffee and stared out the window for nearly an hour. Then my phone rang. Aunt Evelyn. I have an idea. Her voice sounded excited. That's dangerous. She laughed. Listen to me first. I sat down. Okay. How would you feel about spending some time in California? I blinked. Visiting? Moving. I nearly dropped the phone. Moving? Temporarily if you want. She paused. Permanently if you don't. My heart started beating faster. Evelyn. The gallery owner I told you about? Ethan Walker? Yes. He wants to meet you. Suddenly, the room felt smaller. Why? Because he loves your work. My first instinct was disbelief. The same disbelief that always appeared whenever someone complimented me. You don't understand. Actually, I do. Aunt Evelyn's voice became firm. Claire, you have spent 32 years letting people decide your value. Maybe it's time you let someone who actually sees you make that decision instead. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about California. Not because of the gallery. Because of what it represented. Distance. Freedom. Possibility. Then something unexpected happened. The Europe trip planning intensified. Group chats exploded with excitement. Hotel reservations were shared. Restaurant recommendations circulated. Not once did anyone ask whether I was okay staying behind. Not once did anyone thank me. They simply assumed my participation. Just like always. Then came the final straw. 3 nights later, Olivia called. Hey Claire. Hi. Quick question. I already knew where this was going. Okay. Could you take Emma to dance practice on Tuesdays while we're gone? I thought your neighbor offered to help. She did, but honestly, you do it better. There it was again. Not appreciation. Utility. Olivia. Yeah? Do you ever think about me as a person? Silence. Complete silence. Then nervous laughter. What kind of question is that? I ended the call shortly afterward. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m, I opened my photography account. Hundreds of messages waited from strangers around the world. People thanking me for my work. People sharing how certain photographs affected them emotionally. Complete strangers saw more value in me than my own family. The realization changed something. The next afternoon, I called Aunt Evelyn. Are you serious about California? Completely serious. And Ethan Walker actually wants to meet me? He does. I stared out my apartment window at the gray Boston skyline. For years, I had built my life around people who viewed me as a convenience. Maybe it was time to build something different. Okay. My voice barely sounded like my own. Okay? I'll come. Aunt Evelyn laughed with pure joy. Really? Really? The moment I said it, a strange feeling washed over me. Relief. Not fear. Relief. For the first time in years, I was choosing myself. What I didn't know was that while I was planning my escape, my family was preparing for their European vacation. Confident everything would continue exactly as it always had. They had no idea that within 2 weeks, Claire Bennett would be gone. And without realizing it, they were about to discover how much of their lives depended on the daughter they never truly valued. 2 weeks later, I stepped off a plane in California carrying 2 suitcases, 1 camera bag, and absolutely no idea what I was doing. The moment the warm ocean air hit my face, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Possibility. Not certainty. Not security. Just possibility. And somehow that was enough. Aunt Evelyn was waiting outside baggage claim wearing oversized sunglasses and the same colorful scarf she seemed to own in every season. The second she saw me, she wrapped me in a hug. "You actually did it." I laughed. "I still can't believe it." "Good." She grabbed one of my suitcases. "That means you're making progress." Her house sat on a quiet street overlooking the hills near Carmel. It wasn't large or luxurious, but it felt alive. Paintings covered the walls. Handmade pottery filled the shelves. Plants occupied every available corner. Unlike my parents' perfectly staged home, this place felt like someone actually lived there. "You can stay as long as you want," Aunt Evelyn said that first evening. No deadlines. No pressure. Those words nearly made me emotional. Because for the first time in my adult life, nobody wanted something from me. They simply wanted me there. 3 days later, I met Ethan Walker, the gallery owner. The person whose email had terrified me for weeks. His gallery sat in downtown Carmel between a bookstore and a small cafe. Sunlight poured through enormous windows, illuminating paintings and photographs displayed throughout the space. The moment I walked inside, my anxiety skyrocketed. "Claire Bennett?" A tall man approached with a friendly smile. "Ethan Walker." I shook his hand nervously. "Nice to meet you. I've been looking forward to this." We spent nearly 2 hours reviewing my portfolio. Ethan moved slowly through each image, studying details I didn't think anyone noticed. He asked thoughtful questions. Why did I choose certain subjects? What drew me toward overlooked people? What emotions was I trying to capture? Nobody had ever taken my work this seriously. By the end of the meeting, I felt emotionally exhausted. Then Ethan smiled. "I want to offer you something." My stomach tightened. "Okay." "A solo exhibition." I genuinely thought I misheard him. "A what?" He laughed. "A solo exhibition." My mind went completely blank. "Ethan, I don't have professional gallery experience." "I know. I've never sold a photograph." "I know. I don't even consider myself a real artist." He leaned back in his chair. "That's the only statement you've made today that concerns me." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he pointed toward one of my photographs displayed on a tablet screen. An elderly janitor sitting alone after midnight. Exhausted. Invisible. Human. "Do you know why this image works?" I shook my head. "Because you see people." His voice remained calm. "Most photographers chase beautiful things. You chase truth." No compliment had ever affected me the way that one did. Over the next month, preparations for the exhibition consumed my life. Printing. Framing. Planning. Marketing. Every day felt both exciting and terrifying. Meanwhile, something strange was happening back in Massachusetts. At first, I didn't notice. Then the phone calls started. My mother called 3 times during the first week of the Europe trip. I ignored every call. Then Olivia started texting. Short messages. Casual questions. Requests. "Can you remind me where you keep the emergency contact forms? Do you remember Emma's allergy medication schedule? How do you usually organize Mom's birthday dinner?" I didn't answer those either. Apparently nobody had informed them that I no longer lived in Boston. The realization almost made me laugh. For years, they depended on me for everything. Yet nobody cared enough to ask about my life. They literally didn't know I had moved across the country. A week later, Aunt Evelyn walked into the kitchen holding her phone. "You're not going to believe this." I looked up from editing photographs. "What?" She showed me a social media post. Olivia had uploaded vacation pictures from Italy. The caption caught my attention immediately. "Exhausted. Family trips are harder than they look." I laughed. "No." Aunt Evelyn grinned. "Keep reading." Hundreds of comments followed. Apparently the vacation was becoming a disaster. Missed reservations. Scheduling problems. Constant arguments. Forgotten medications. Lost documents. Transportation confusion. Tiny issues that somehow multiplied daily. Issues I would normally solve. "Interesting," Aunt Evelyn said carefully. I smiled. "Very interesting." The truth was almost funny. For years, I believed my family didn't need me. They treated me as though I was replaceable. Yet the moment I disappeared, their carefully managed lives started unraveling. Not because I was extraordinary. Because I had quietly carried responsibilities nobody else wanted. Then one evening, while reviewing final exhibition layouts, my phone buzzed again. A message from Olivia. Unlike the others, this one contained no request. Just a screenshot. My photography account. Somehow she had found it. Attached beneath the image was a single sentence. "Claire, is this really yours?" My pulse accelerated immediately. Because for the first time in our lives, Olivia wasn't looking at me as the family helper. She was looking at something I created. And I had a feeling that discovery was about to change everything. For 3 days, I ignored Olivia's message. Not because I didn't know what to say. Because I didn't trust my reaction. For most of my life, any attention from my family felt significant. Even negative attention. It took enormous effort not to immediately explain myself, apologize for leaving, or somehow make them comfortable. Old habits are difficult to break. Fortunately, California was helping. Every morning, I woke up surrounded by people who treated me like a person rather than a resource. Every day spent preparing for the exhibition strengthened something inside me that had been weak for years. Confidence. Not arrogance. Just confidence. The belief that my existence had value independent of what I could do for other people. Meanwhile, my family's European vacation continued unraveling. Aunt Evelyn treated the situation like a reality television show. Every morning she checked social media updates while drinking coffee. "You need to see this." She walked into the kitchen carrying her phone. I looked up from editing photographs. "What happened now?" "Your mother accidentally booked the wrong train tickets." I laughed. "No." "Yes." Apparently half the family spent 6 hours stranded in Florence because nobody verified the travel schedule. 2 days later, another problem emerged. Then another. Then another. Individually, the issues weren't major. Together, they created chaos. What fascinated me wasn't the problems themselves. It was the pattern. For years, I quietly managed dozens of details nobody noticed. Flight confirmations. Reservation reminders. Medical information. Backup plans. Emergency contacts. None of those responsibilities were difficult. They simply required attention. The moment I disappeared, nobody replaced that attention. "Do you feel guilty?" Aunt Evelyn asked one afternoon. I considered the question honestly. "A little." She nodded. "That's normal." "Does it make me a bad person?" "No." She smiled. "It makes you a recovering people pleaser." We both laughed. The truth was uncomfortable. Part of me still felt responsible for everyone else's problems. Yet another part was finally learning something important. Other people's emergencies didn't automatically belong to me. 1 week before the exhibition, Ethan invited me to the gallery for a final review. Large framed photographs now filled the walls. Seeing my work displayed professionally felt surreal. I walked slowly through the space while Ethan observed quietly. "What are you thinking?" he asked. I stared at an image of an elderly waitress sitting alone after closing time. "I keep expecting someone to tell me this isn't real." Ethan laughed. "It feels real to me. You know what I mean." He nodded thoughtfully. "You're waiting for permission." The statement hit harder than I expected. Because he was right. I had spent decades waiting for permission to take up space. Permission to succeed. Permission to matter. Ethan gestured toward the gallery walls. "Nobody gives that permission." "Then who does?" He smiled. "You." Later that evening, I finally responded to Olivia's message. Not emotionally. Not defensively. Just honestly. "Yes. The photography account is mine." Her response arrived less than 2 minutes later. "Wait. You're serious?" I stared at the screen. Then another message appeared. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" The question almost made me laugh. Because it revealed exactly how differently we remembered our family. To Olivia, I kept secrets. To me, nobody ever asked. Eventually, I replied. Because nobody was interested. Several minutes passed before her next message appeared. "That's not true." I looked at those words for a long time. Then I closed the conversation. Because it was true. We both knew it. Pretending otherwise wouldn't help anyone. 2 days later, the family returned from Europe. The first voicemail arrived less than 24 hours later. My mother. "Claire, please call me." Then my father. Then Olivia. Then even Ryan. Apparently someone finally informed them I had moved. I ignored every message. Not permanently. Just temporarily. For once, I wanted my life to belong entirely to me. The night before the exhibition opening, I couldn't sleep. Anxiety filled every corner of my mind. What if nobody came? What if they hated the photographs? What if Ethan made a terrible mistake? Around midnight, I walked outside and sat on Aunt Evelyn's porch overlooking the quiet street. She joined me a few minutes later carrying 2 mugs of tea. "You're nervous." "Terrified." She laughed softly. "Good. Good? It means you care." We sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Your whole life you've been trying to earn a seat at someone else's table." I looked at her. "Maybe. Tomorrow," she said gently, "people are coming to sit at yours." Tears immediately filled my eyes. Because for the first time I realized she was right. This exhibition wasn't about proving my worth. It was about finally believing I already had it. The following afternoon, guests would begin arriving. Collectors. Journalists. Art lovers. Strangers. What I didn't know was that several unexpected visitors were already making plans of their own. Because back in Massachusetts, Olivia wasn't just looking at my photography account anymore. She was showing it to my parents. And for the first time in their lives, the Bennett family was about to discover that Claire Bennett had become someone they no longer understood. The morning of the exhibition opening felt strangely calm. After weeks of anxiety, preparation, and second-guessing, there was nothing left to do except show up. I arrived at Ethan Walker's gallery 3 hours before the doors opened. Sunlight streamed through the massive front windows, illuminating every photograph hanging on the walls. For several minutes, I simply stood there alone. Looking. Breathing. Trying to accept that this was real. "You made it." Ethan appeared carrying 2 coffees. "Barely." He handed me a cup. Nervous? Terrified. He laughed. Good. It means this matters. The gallery looked incredible. 28 photographs filled the space. Images of ordinary people captured in extraordinary moments of honesty. A janitor finishing a midnight shift. A grandmother waiting alone at a bus stop. A waitress sitting quietly after closing. Faces most people would never notice. Stories most people would never ask about. Yet somehow, together, they created something powerful. Around noon, the first guests began arriving. Then more. Then dozens more. Art collectors. Local journalists. Photography enthusiasts. Tourists. Complete strangers. I spent the first hour feeling awkward and overwhelmed. People stood in front of my work discussing emotions, themes, and technical choices I hadn't consciously considered. It felt surreal hearing strangers analyze photographs I created alone in silence. Then something remarkable happened. A woman in her 70s approached me with tears in her eyes. "Are you the artist?" she asked. "Yes." She pointed toward a photograph of an elderly waitress sitting alone after work. "That's me." I blinked. "What?" She smiled. "Not literally. But emotionally." Her eyes filled with tears. I felt invisible for years. Suddenly, I understood something important. These photographs were never about me. They were about recognition. About making overlooked people feel seen. The realization changed everything. By mid-afternoon, several photographs had already sold. The first sale nearly made me cry. Not because of the money. Because somebody valued something I created enough to bring it into their home. Ethan noticed my reaction immediately. "Get used to it." I laughed. "I don't think that's possible." "It is." He smiled. "You're just meeting yourself for the first time." Around 5 o'clock, a local newspaper reporter requested an interview. Then another publication. Then a podcast host. Everything seemed to accelerate simultaneously. The girl who spent 32 years being ignored suddenly couldn't find enough time to answer questions. The irony wasn't lost on me. Then my phone started vibrating. Once. Twice. 5 times. 10 times. I ignored it at first. Then curiosity won. Olivia. Mom. Dad. Olivia. Mom. Unknown number. Olivia. My stomach tightened. Something felt wrong. I stepped into a quieter corner and opened the newest message. "Claire, where are you?" Another message followed immediately. "We need to talk." Then another. "Please answer." I stared at the screen. Before I could decide whether to respond, Ethan approached. "Everything okay?" "I think so." "Good." He pointed toward the entrance. "Because you have visitors." My heart immediately dropped. Slowly, I turned around. Standing near the front doors were 4 people I recognized instantly. My parents. Olivia. Ryan. For a moment, the entire room seemed to freeze. They looked completely out of place. Not because of how they dressed. Because of their expressions. Confusion. Shock. Disbelief. My mother was staring at the gallery walls as though she had entered the wrong building. My father looked equally stunned. Olivia seemed emotional. Ryan looked uncomfortable. Then I understood. They weren't here because I invited them. They found the exhibition online. The same exhibition they never imagined possible. The same daughter they never bothered to understand. Slowly, my mother walked forward. "Claire?" Her voice barely worked. Nearby guests began noticing the interaction. Conversations quieted. Heads turned. I suddenly became aware of how many people were watching. Hi, Mom. She looked around the gallery. At the photographs. At the sold markers attached beneath several pieces. At the crowd. Then back at me. You did all this? I almost laughed. Not because the question was funny. Because it revealed how little she knew about me. Yes. My father spoke next. We had no idea. That sentence hurt more than they probably intended. Because it was true. They had no idea. Not because I hid. Because they never looked. Olivia stepped forward carefully. Claire. Tears filled her eyes. Your work is beautiful. The compliment felt genuine. Which somehow made the situation harder. Around us, guests pretended not to listen while obviously listening. Ethan stood nearby observing quietly. The atmosphere felt fragile. Unpredictable. Then my mother asked the question I should have expected. Why didn't you tell us? I stared at her for several seconds. Then looked around the gallery. At the photographs. At the life I built after leaving. Finally, I answered honestly. Would you have listened? Silence spread through the room instantly. Nobody answered. Because everyone already knew the truth. Yet what none of them realized was that this conversation was only beginning. And before the night ended, the entire gallery was about to learn exactly how the Bennett family treated the daughter standing before them. The silence after my question seemed to stretch across the entire gallery. Would you have listened? For simple words. Yet nobody in my family could answer them. Because the truth stood all around us. 28 photographs. A crowded gallery. Sold markers beneath multiple pieces. Journalists taking notes. Strangers connecting emotionally with my work. Evidence of an entire life they never bothered to notice. My mother looked away first. My father stared at the floor. Olivia wiped tears from her eyes. Around us, guests pretended to continue browsing while very obviously listening. Ethan remained nearby, giving me space while quietly monitoring the situation. Finally, Olivia stepped forward. Claire, that's not fair. I almost laughed. Not because the statement was funny. Because fairness suddenly mattered to her. Not fair? My voice remained calm. Really? She looked uncomfortable immediately. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Olivia hesitated. For perhaps the first time in her life, charm wasn't helping. We didn't know. Exactly. I nodded. You didn't know. My father finally spoke. Because you never told us. There it was again. The same argument. The same attempt to shift responsibility. Something inside me hardened. Not with anger. With clarity. Dad, do you know what my favorite color is? He blinked. What? My favorite color. Silence. I continued. Do you know my favorite book? No answer. Do you know where I spent my last birthday? My father's face changed slightly. My mother looked uncomfortable. Claire. Do either of you know the name of the company I worked for before I moved here? Nothing. Complete silence. Guests nearby stopped pretending not to listen. I didn't hide my life from you. My voice remained steady. You just weren't interested. Those words landed harder than I expected. My mother's eyes immediately filled with tears. Yet before she could respond, another voice interrupted. She's right. Everyone turned toward Olivia. Including me. Olivia looked terrified. But she kept going. She's right. My mother stared at her in disbelief. Olivia. No, Mom. Her voice cracked slightly. She's right. For the first time, I saw genuine guilt on my sister's face. Not defensiveness. Not excuses. Guilt. I knew. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Maybe not everything. But enough. The room became completely silent. Olivia looked directly at me. I knew they expected more from you than they expected from me. My stomach tightened. Olivia. I knew they called you whenever they needed something. She wiped her eyes. And I let it happen. My parents looked stunned. Apparently they weren't expecting their golden child to switch sides. Neither was I. Then Olivia said something that changed everything. Do you know how many times Emma asked why Aunt Claire wasn't coming to Europe? My mother looked away. Every day. Olivia's voice broke. Every single day. Suddenly, the entire room felt different. Less like an argument. More like a confession. My father slowly sat down on a nearby bench. He looked older than he had an hour earlier. Much older. We didn't realize. He began. I stopped him immediately. Please don't say that. Claire. Don't tell me you didn't realize. My voice remained calm but firm. You announced to 30 people that I was staying home while everyone else traveled Europe. Nobody responded. You laughed at an email calling me free help. More silence. You knew. My mother started crying openly now. Not polite tears. Real tears. Yet I couldn't tell whether she was grieving me or grieving the version of herself she thought existed. Then something unexpected happened. A woman standing near one of my photographs approached slowly. She was one of the gallery visitors. A stranger. I'm sorry, she said gently. I know this isn't my conversation. Everyone looked at her. But your work helped me today. She glanced toward my parents. And from what I've heard, she's telling the truth. Another guest nodded. Then another. Not dramatically. Just quietly. Suddenly my family found themselves surrounded by people who saw exactly what was happening. People who weren't emotionally invested. People who could recognize unfairness immediately. My father looked around the room and seemed to understand that too. For the first time, he couldn't hide behind family narratives. Then my mother whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. I'm sorry. The words hung in the air. Fragile. Incomplete. Years too late. Yet real. I looked at her for several seconds. For what? She opened her mouth. Then closed it. Because that was the problem. Sorry wasn't enough. Not without understanding. Not without specifics. Not without accountability. The silence returned. Then Olivia slowly reached into her purse. There's something else. My stomach tightened immediately. She pulled out her phone. I brought it with me. Brought what? Olivia swallowed hard. Then turned the screen toward everyone. The email. The free help email. The same message that changed my life. Around us, guests began reading over shoulders. Expressions shifted. Surprise. Discomfort. Disapproval. My mother looked horrified. My father looked trapped. Olivia's voice trembled. Maybe everyone deserves to see this. And in that moment, standing inside my own exhibition surrounded by strangers, I realized the Bennett family was no longer controlling the story. The truth was. The moment Olivia turned her phone toward the crowd, the atmosphere inside the gallery changed completely. Until then, people had only heard pieces of the story. They had witnessed an uncomfortable family confrontation. They had sensed tension. But now they were looking at evidence. Actual evidence. Written words. My mother's laughing emoji. My father's response. Olivia's comment calling me free help. One by one, people read the messages. The reactions were immediate. Some looked shocked. Others looked embarrassed on my family's behalf. A few simply shook their heads. Nobody seemed confused. Because the meaning was obvious. My mother covered her face with one hand. Olivia. Her voice sounded broken. Why would you do that? Olivia looked at her for several seconds. Then answered quietly. Because it's true. Silence. Complete silence. My father stood motionless. Ryan stared at the floor. The gallery guests continued reading. For the first time in my life, the story wasn't being told by my parents. It wasn't being softened, edited, or explained away. It was simply visible. Ethan slowly approached and stood beside me. Not to intervene. Just to support. You okay? He asked quietly. I nodded. Surprisingly, I was. Not because this was easy. Because I finally felt free. For years, I carried the burden of proving my experience was real. Explaining favoritism. Explaining exclusion. Explaining why certain comments hurt. Suddenly, I didn't have to explain anything. The evidence spoke for itself. My father finally broke the silence. We made mistakes. A woman standing nearby folded her arms. That seems like an understatement. Several people nodded. My mother looked mortified. Yet nobody was being cruel. They were simply responding honestly. The same honesty my family had avoided for years. Then my mother turned toward me. Claire, please. Tears streamed down her face. Can we talk somewhere private? For a moment, I considered it. Then I looked around the gallery. At the people who had come to support my work. At the photographs surrounding us. At the life I built after leaving. No. The word surprised everyone. Including me. My mother's expression collapsed. Please. No. My voice remained calm. Because every important decision involving me happened publicly. Nobody responded. You announced I wasn't part of the Europe trip publicly. Silence. You assigned me childcare responsibilities publicly. More silence. You treated me like free help publicly. My mother started crying harder. My father looked defeated. Yet I continued. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I wanted truth. For 32 years, I adjusted myself to fit whatever role made everyone else comfortable. I looked directly at my parents. I'm not doing that anymore. The room remained silent. Then something unexpected happened. Applause. Soft at first. Then louder. I turned around in shock. Several gallery visitors were clapping. Not for the argument. For the statement. For the boundary. For the courage it took to finally say it. Tears immediately filled my eyes. Because nobody had ever applauded me for choosing myself before. My mother seemed stunned. My father looked overwhelmed. Olivia cried openly. Yet strangely, I no longer felt angry. Just tired. Deeply tired. Then my father reached into his pocket and removed a folded piece of paper. I wrote something. I frowned. What? On the flight here. His hand shook slightly. I knew we might not get another chance. He looked at the paper. Then at me. But I don't think tonight is the right time. For a brief moment, I saw something I hadn't expected. Regret. Genuine regret. Not embarrassment. Not damage control. Regret. Then he placed the paper back into his pocket. You deserved better. The words hung in the air. My mother looked shocked. Apparently she wasn't expecting him to say that. Neither was I. You deserved better than what we gave you. His voice cracked. And I don't know how to fix that. Nobody spoke. Because there wasn't an answer. Some damage can't be fixed. It can only be acknowledged. Eventually, Ethan gently guided the conversation toward an ending. The exhibition still had guests. The evening still needed to continue. My family slowly prepared to leave. Before walking away, Olivia hugged me. The first real hug we had shared in years. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know." Then my mother approached. She looked exhausted. Older. Smaller somehow. "I love you." The words felt strange. Not because I doubted she meant them. Because they arrived decades late. "Good night, Mom." Her face fell slightly. Yet she nodded. Finally, my father stepped forward. He didn't hug me. Didn't ask for forgiveness. Didn't make promises. He simply said, "Watch your email tomorrow." Then they left. I watched them disappear through the gallery doors and assumed the hardest part was over. I was wrong. Because the next morning, I would open my inbox and find a message from my father. A message that would force me to decide whether some relationships can be rebuilt after they have been broken for too long. The email arrived at 6:17 the next morning. I stared at the subject line for nearly 10 minutes before opening it. Not because I was afraid of what it contained. Because I wasn't sure what I wanted it to contain. For most of my life, I imagined what it would feel like if my parents finally understood. If they finally saw me. If they finally acknowledged the damage. Yet standing in Aunt Evelyn's kitchen with a cup of coffee growing cold beside me, I realized something unexpected. Understanding and healing were not the same thing. Slowly, I opened the message. It wasn't long. There were no dramatic explanations. No attempts to rewrite history. No excuses. My father wrote about the anniversary party. The Europe trip. The gallery. Then he wrote something I never expected to read. For years, I told myself that because you never complained, you were fine. Looking back, I realized that wasn't wisdom. It was convenience. It allowed me to ignore things I should have confronted. I continued reading. Your mother and I spent so much time celebrating Olivia's needs that we stopped noticing yours. That failure belongs to us. Not you. Tears filled my eyes. Not because the words fixed anything. Because they were honest. For the first time, completely honest. The final paragraph stayed with me the longest. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect another chance. I only hope that someday when you think about your childhood, you remember at least a few moments when we got it right. After finishing the email, I sat quietly for a long time. Aunt Evelyn eventually joined me. Bad? She asked. I shook my head. No. Good? Another pause. Human. She smiled knowingly. That's progress. Over the following weeks, life slowly returned to normal. Or at least a new version of normal. The exhibition became a tremendous success. More photographs sold. Additional galleries reached out. Interview requests continued arriving. For the first time, I was building a career around something I loved. Yet the most important changes happened away from public attention. My parents continued writing occasionally. Not often. Not excessively. Just enough to show effort. The messages were different now. They asked questions instead of making requests. They listened more than they talked. They seemed genuinely interested in learning who I had become. Sometimes I responded. Sometimes I didn't. There were no rules. No obligations. Only choices. Olivia and I spoke more frequently. Not every day. Not every week. But enough to slowly rebuild something healthier than what existed before. One afternoon she confessed something that surprised me. I used to think you were stronger than me. I laughed softly. Why? Because you never needed anyone. The statement perfectly captured the misunderstanding at the center of our family. I needed people, I told her. I just stopped expecting them to show up. Neither of us spoke for several seconds after that. Some truths require silence. 6 months later, I returned to Boston for the first time since moving away. Not because my parents asked. Because I wanted to. The distinction mattered. We met for lunch. Nothing dramatic happened. Nobody cried. Nobody gave speeches. We simply talked. My father asked about photography. My mother asked about California. For the first time in decades, they seemed curious about my actual life. It felt strange. But not unpleasant. Before leaving, my mother handed me a small photo album. Inside were dozens of childhood pictures. Some I had never seen before. On the final page, she had written a note. We spent too many years looking at the child we expected instead of the person you were. Reading that sentence hurt. Yet somehow it also healed. Because acknowledgement matters. More than people realize. A year after the exhibition, Ethan helped organize my second solo show. It was larger. More ambitious. More successful. During the opening night reception, I looked around the crowded gallery and thought about the anniversary party that changed everything. If my parents hadn't humiliated me that night, I probably would have continued accepting the same role forever. I would have remained useful. Dependable. Invisible. Instead, I left. And leaving taught me something important. Walking away isn't always an act of anger. Sometimes it's an act of self-respect. Sometimes distance creates the clarity that proximity destroys. Sometimes the only way to save a relationship is to stop sacrificing yourself to maintain it. Today, my relationship with my family exists in a very different form. Healthier. Smaller. More honest. The boundaries remain. They probably always will. Yet the resentment no longer controls me. The need for approval no longer controls me. Most importantly, their opinion no longer defines me. Last month, Emma asked if she could visit California during summer break. She wants to learn photography. Apparently she carries a camera everywhere now. The thought makes me smile. Because maybe that is how healing works. Not through grand gestures. Not through perfect endings. Through small changes repeated over time. Through people choosing to do better than the generations before them. Looking back now, most people focus on the humiliation. The anniversary party. The email. The confrontation in the gallery. But that was never the real story. The real story was about a woman who spent 32 years believing her value came from what she could do for other people. Then one day she discovered she was valuable simply because she existed. My parents humiliated me at their wedding anniversary. So I left forever. The irony is that leaving didn't end my life. It finally allowed it to begin. And the greatest lesson I learned was this: you are not selfish for choosing yourself after years of being chosen last.